Zion Foster's own cousin is in the Wayne County Jail right now facing charges for her murder. Prosecutors say it was a long road of gathering evidence, examining it, and linking it together to make an arrest.
Can't go to work. I'm a single parent. Everything that I do is for my children. Every ounce of money and time or whatever and energy is for them. It's to make sure that they're good.
Her mom at one point talked to me and I couldn't bring myself, but your daughter just died. What do I do? And I can't even explain it. What happened? I just can tell you my honest reaction.
I put her in a dumpster. This was Jaylin Brazier's confession to police about what he did to the girl who trusted him most. On January 2022, 17-year-old Zion Foster sent her mom and boyfriend a message before she disappeared, stating that she was going out that night with her favorite cousin. Zion hung out with Jaylin at least twice a month. To her, he wasn't just family. He was her favorite person to spend time with. So when her mother came frantically searching for her missing daughter the next day, at first Jaylin's response was shocking. He looked her straight in the eye and claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to Zion in years. He comforted the family and even helped search for her, all while knowing exactly where he had thrown her body away, like trash. The lie was just the beginning.
I just think that only a monster could pull off something like that.
Kayla Foster says she spent the last 18 months missing her niece Zion and wondering if the person who hurt her would ever have to answer for it.
Jaylin had been harboring twisted desires for his teenage cousin. When Zion refused to give him what he craved, he made that crazy decision that left both families grieving. In fact, what the police discovered in his phone shocked everyone and paved a way to his 100-year sentencing. This is the story of Zion Foster, whose favorite cousin decided she had to disappear forever. Welcome to Crazy Dark Files, where we examine the most disturbing true crime cases that mainstream media often overlooks. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories and honoring victims like Zion Foster, who deserve to be remembered.
Zion Foster went missing last January. She left her home and never returned. Police spent months searching a site in Macomb County after Brazier admitted to putting Zion's body in a dumpster, but she was never found. Brazier was arraigned by video on charges of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence in the case. 7 Action News reporter Alex Bozargian spoke to Zion's aunt, who is now finding a sense of closure.
Zion Foster was just 17 years old when her life was tragically cut short, but in those brief years she had already made an indelible mark on everyone who knew her. Born and raised in East Point, Michigan, Zion embodied the kind of vibrant spirit that could light up any room she entered. Her infectious smile and warm personality drew people to her naturally, creating lasting bonds with family, friends, and even casual acquaintances who found themselves charmed by her genuine nature. Family was everything to Zion Foster. She shared an exceptionally close relationship with her mother, Sierra Milton, who described her daughter as not just a child but a best friend and confidant. Their bond transcended the typical mother-daughter dynamic, built on mutual respect, open communication, and shared dreams for Zion's future. Sierra often spoke about how Zion would call her multiple times throughout the day, sharing everything from mundane school gossip to her deepest aspirations and concerns. The Foster family structure was tight-knit, with Zion serving as a beloved daughter, sister, and cousin who brought joy and laughter to family gatherings. Her relatives consistently described her as the type of person who remembered birthdays, checked in on family members during difficult times, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to lift someone's spirits. This caring nature extended beyond her immediate family to her extended relatives, including her cousin Jaylin Brazier, with whom she maintained what everyone believed to be a trusting and supportive relationship. Academically, Zion was a dedicated student with clear goals for her future. She attended school in the East Point area and had developed specific plans for her post-graduation life. Her teachers and classmates knew her as someone who took her education seriously, while still maintaining the social connections that made high school enjoyable. She balanced her academic responsibilities with part-time work, demonstrating the kind of maturity and work ethic that impressed adults in her life. Zion's aspirations extended far beyond her teenage years. She had concrete plans for attending college and pursuing a career that would allow her to help others, reflecting the compassionate nature that defined her personality. Her family supported these dreams wholeheartedly, with her mother working to ensure that Zion would have every opportunity to achieve her goals. The conversations between mother and daughter often centered around these future plans, creating a shared vision of success and independence that motivated both of them. What made Zion particularly special to those who knew her was her ability to maintain authenticity in all her relationships. She wasn't someone who put on different personas for different people. Instead, she remained consistently genuine, whether she was talking to her mother, hanging out with friends, or spending time with extended family members. This authenticity created deep trust between Zion and the people in her life, as they knew they could count on her honesty and loyalty. The relationship between Zion and her cousin Jaylin Brazier appeared from the outside to exemplify this trust. Family members observed their interactions and saw what seemed to be a typical cousin relationship, built on shared family history and mutual respect. Jaylin was someone Zion felt comfortable spending time with, someone she trusted enough to make plans with and rely on for transportation and companionship. This trust was not unusual within their family structure, where cousins often maintained close relationships well into adulthood. Zion's social circle extended beyond family to include friends from school and work who appreciated her loyalty and humor. She was the type of friend who remembered important events in others' lives, offered support during difficult times, and celebrated successes with genuine enthusiasm. Her friends often sought her advice because they trusted her judgment and valued her perspective on various situations. The tragic irony of Zion's story lies in the very qualities that made her so beloved by her family and friends. Her trusting nature, her willingness to see the best in people, and her comfort with family members created the circumstances that would ultimately lead to her disappearance. The same openness and trust that enriched her relationships and brought joy to those around her also made her vulnerable to betrayal from someone she had every reason to trust. As January 4, 2022 approached, Zion Foster was living a full, promising life, surrounded by people who loved her deeply. She had no way of knowing that her trust in family, her willingness to spend time with her cousin, and her natural inclination to see good in others would place her in mortal danger. January 4th, 2022 began like any other day for Zion Foster, but it would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would consume her family and expose the darkest betrayal imaginable. That evening, Zion made what would become her final communications with the people who loved her most. She sent messages to both her mother, Sierra Milton, and her boyfriend, letting them know her plans for the night. The message was simple and routine. She was going out with her favorite cousin, Jaylin Brazier. This wasn't unusual behavior for Zion. She regularly spent time with Jaylin, hanging out with him at least twice a month in what appeared to be a normal cousin relationship. Her family had no reason to be concerned about these outings, as Jaylin was considered a trusted family member who had been part of Zion's life for years. When Zion mentioned going out with her favorite cousin, it seemed like just another typical evening between relatives. The last message Zion sent indicated she was on her way home, a communication that would later take on devastating significance. Her family expected her to return that night, but as hours passed without any word from Zion, concern began to build. When she failed to come home and didn't respond to calls or texts, her family knew something was seriously wrong. The next day, January 5, 2022, Sierra Milton's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive. Her daughter had never disappeared without explanation, and the silence was completely out of character for someone who typically maintained constant communication with her family. Desperate for answers and clinging to hope that there might be a simple explanation, Sierra reached out to the last person known to have been with her daughter, Jaylin Brazier. What happened next would later be recognized as the first in a series of calculated lies that Jaylin would tell to cover his tracks. When Zion's mother approached him seeking information about her missing daughter, Jaylin delivered shocking news that made no sense given what the family knew about his relationship with Zion. He claimed, with apparent conviction, that he had not seen or spoken to Zion in years. This statement was immediately suspicious to anyone who knew the family dynamics, Zion had explicitly told her mother and boyfriend that she was going out with Jaylin just the night before. Family members knew that Zion and Jaylin maintained regular contact and spent time together frequently. The claim that they hadn't spoken in years directly contradicted everything the family understood about their relationship. Despite the obvious inconsistency in Jaylin's story, he maintained this position when questioned further. He presented himself as genuinely surprised to hear that Zion was missing, and offered no helpful information about her whereabouts or activities. To Zion's desperate family, his response seemed not just unhelpful but actively misleading, though they couldn't yet understand the full scope of his deception. As the hours turned into days, the Foster family's desperation intensified. They contacted local law enforcement to report Zion as a missing person, providing investigators with the timeline of her last known activities and communications. The family organized search efforts, reaching out to friends, relatives, and community members who might have information about Zion's disappearance. During this agonizing period, Jaylin's behavior became increasingly suspicious to those paying close attention. While presenting himself as concerned about his missing cousin, his actions and statements didn't align with someone genuinely worried about a family member's safety. He participated in some family discussions about Zion's disappearance, but offered no useful insights or suggestions about where she might be or what might have happened to her. Law enforcement began their investigation by examining Zion's last known activities and contacts. The discrepancy between Zion's final messages, indicating she was with Jaylin, and his claims of not having seen her in years immediately raised red flags for investigators. This contradiction became a focal point of the early investigation, as detectives worked to establish a timeline of events and identify potential witnesses or suspects. As pressure mounted from both the family and law enforcement, Jaylin's story began to show cracks. The initial claim of not having seen Zion in years became increasingly difficult to maintain, as investigators gathered evidence and testimony from family members who could verify the cousin's regular contact. Phone records, social media activity, and witness statements all contradicted Jaylin's initial assertions. The family's search efforts intensified as days passed without any sign of Zion. Sierra Milton and other relatives distributed flyers, contacted local media, and pleaded for public assistance in finding the missing teenager. The community responded with support, but as time went on without any credible sightings or leads, hope began to fade and fear began to take its place. Throughout this period, Jaylin maintained his facade of concern while continuing to mislead investigators and family members about his involvement in Zion's disappearance. His ability to look Zion's mother in the eye and lie about his contact with her daughter demonstrated a level of callousness that would later be fully revealed as the investigation progressed. The growing tension around Jaylin's changing story and suspicious behavior was building toward a breaking point that would ultimately expose the horrific truth about what happened to Zion Foster on January 4, 2022. As the investigation into Zion Foster's disappearance intensified, law enforcement began piecing together a disturbing puzzle that would reveal the true nature of Jaylin Brazier's relationship with his teenage cousin. What started as a missing person case quickly transformed into something far more sinister, as investigators uncovered evidence that painted a horrifying picture of predatory behavior and calculated deception. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators obtained access to Jaylin's digital footprint, including his text messages and internet search history. What they discovered was deeply disturbing and provided crucial insight into his mindset and intentions regarding Zion. The evidence revealed that Jaylin had been harboring inappropriate sexual desires for his 17-year-old cousin, desires that he had been acting upon through explicit communications and disturbing online behavior. Text messages recovered from Jaylin's phone showed a pattern of inappropriate sexual advances toward Zion that went far beyond any normal cousin relationship. These messages demonstrated that Jaylin had been pursuing Zion in ways that made her uncomfortable, and that she had been rejecting his advances. The content of these communications was explicit enough to establish that Jaylin's interest in spending time with Zion was not motivated by familial affection, but by sexual desire that he was determined to fulfill, regardless of her consent. Even more damning was Jaylin's internet search history, which revealed a disturbing pattern of searches related to sexual violence and inappropriate content involving young women. These searches provided investigators with insight into Jaylin's psychological state and suggested that his intentions toward Zion were premeditated rather than impulsive. The timing of these searches, particularly those conducted in the days and weeks leading up to Zion's disappearance, established a clear pattern of escalating obsession. Faced with mounting evidence that contradicted his initial claims, Jaylin's story began to crumble under investigative pressure. The assertion that he hadn't seen or spoken to Zion in years became impossible to maintain when confronted with phone records, text message logs, and witness testimony that proved ongoing contact between the cousins. Investigators methodically dismantled each of his lies, forcing him to acknowledge the truth about his relationship with Zion. Under intense questioning, Jaylin finally admitted that he had indeed been with Zion on January 4, 2022. This admission represented a significant shift from his initial denials and opened the door for investigators to press for more details about what had transpired during their time together. However, even as he acknowledged being with Zion, Jaylin continued to provide misleading information about the circumstances of their encounter and what had happened to her. The investigation revealed that Jaylin had picked up Zion that evening under the pretense of spending time together as cousins typically would. However, the evidence suggested that his true intentions were far more sinister. Based on the pattern of explicit messages and his internet search history, investigators believed that Jaylin had planned to sexually assault his cousin and had used the family relationship and her trust in him to create the opportunity. As investigators continued to apply pressure and present evidence, Jaylin's facade finally collapsed completely. In what would become one of the most shocking confessions in recent memory, he admitted to police what he had done with Zion's body after she died. The 5 words that would haunt everyone involved in the case came tumbling out. "I put her in a dumpster." This confession was devastating not only for its callousness, but for what it revealed about Jaylin's complete lack of remorse or humanity. He had taken his 17-year-old cousin, someone who trusted him implicitly, and after whatever horrific events had transpired between them, he had disposed of her body like garbage. The casual nature of his admission suggested a level of detachment and cruelty that shocked even experienced investigators. The confession raised immediate questions about the circumstances of Zion's death. While Jaylin admitted to disposing of her body, the exact details of how she died remained unclear. His version of events claimed that Zion had died unexpectedly, but given the evidence of his sexual obsession with her and the pattern of rejected advances, investigators suspected that her death was the result of sexual violence that had escalated beyond his control. The disposal of Zion's body in a dumpster represented not just a crime, but a profound betrayal of family bonds and human decency. Jaylin had taken someone who loved and trusted him and reduced her to something to be thrown away and forgotten. This act demonstrated a complete absence of the familial love and respect that should have protected Zion from harm. Following his confession about the disposal, investigators immediately began efforts to locate Zion's remains. However, the confession came weeks after her disappearance, and the reality of waste management systems meant that her body had likely been processed through the waste disposal system, making recovery extremely difficult, if not impossible. This added another layer of cruelty to the case, as it meant that Zion's family might never have the closure of laying her to rest properly. The investigation also revealed the calculated nature of Jaylin's deception following Zion's death. For weeks, he had participated in search efforts, comforted family members, and maintained the pretense of being a concerned cousin looking for his missing relative. All the while, he knew exactly what had happened to Zion and where he had disposed of her body. This level of sustained deception required a callousness that spoke to his complete lack of empathy or remorse. The evidence painted a picture of a young woman who had been betrayed by someone she should have been able to trust completely. Zion's final hours were spent with someone who had been harboring sexual desires for her, someone who had been planning to act on those desires regardless of her consent, and someone who ultimately killed her and disposed of her body without any regard for her humanity or the devastation it would cause her family. The psychological profile that emerged from the investigation showed Jaylin as someone who had been escalating his inappropriate behavior towards Zion over time, using their family relationship to maintain access to her despite her rejection of his advances. The evidence suggested that January 4, 2022, represented the culmination of this escalating pattern, when his obsession finally led to violence and murder. What do you think really happened in those final moments? Let me know in the comments below. The investigation had uncovered the horrific truth about Zion Foster's disappearance, but it had also revealed the depths of betrayal and evil that could exist within what should have been the safety of family relationships. The courtroom proceedings that would determine Jaylin Brazier's fate began with the weight of a community's grief and a family's desperate search for answers. As prosecutors laid out their case, the evidence painted a disturbing picture of grooming, sexual obsession, and violence that had culminated in Zion Foster's death and disappearance. The prosecution's case centered heavily on the sexual motive that investigators believed drove Brazier's actions on that January evening in 2022. The most damning evidence came from the digital forensics examination of both Zion's and Brazier's phones, which revealed over 4,000 text messages exchanged between the cousins. Many of these messages were sexually explicit in nature, demonstrating a pattern of inappropriate communication that prosecutors argued showed Brazier had been grooming his 17-year-old cousin for a sexual relationship. The content of these messages shocked the courtroom and provided crucial insight into Brazier's mindset and intentions regarding Zion. Prosecutors presented evidence that Brazier had been pursuing an inappropriate sexual relationship with his cousin, using their familiar bond and her trust in him as a means to manipulate and exploit her. The sheer volume of messages, over 4,000, indicated an obsessive level of communication that went far beyond normal cousin relationship. Even more disturbing was the discovery of Brazier's internet search history, which revealed multiple links to cousin porn on his phone. This evidence supported the prosecution's argument that Brazier had developed a sexual fixation on his cousin and had been consuming content that normalized and encouraged such inappropriate relationship. The timing and frequency of these searches provided investigators with insight into Brazier's psychological state and suggested that his intentions toward Zion were premeditated rather than impulsive. Brazier's internet searches also included disturbing queries about drugs and what could possibly kill a person, as well as searches about whether it was possible to charge someone with murder if the victim's body had not been found. These searches, conducted around the time of Zion's disappearance, demonstrated a consciousness of guilt and suggested that Brazier had been researching ways to commit the perfect crime and avoid prosecution. Physical evidence also played a crucial role in the prosecution's case. Brazier's ex-girlfriend testified about a significant detail from the early morning hours of January 5, 2022. She recalled that when Brazier gave her a ride home from work during those early morning hours, she noticed a large, deep, bloody scratch on his collarbone. When she asked about the injury, Brazier claimed it was from her pet cat. However, his ex-girlfriend testified that her cat had never scratched anyone that badly before, casting doubt on Brazier's explanation and suggesting the scratch may have come from a struggle with Zion. The prosecution argued that when Zion rejected Brazier's sexual advances on January 4, 2022, he became violent. They contended that the evidence showed Brazier had lured Zion out under the pretense of spending time together as cousins, but his true intention was to pursue the sexual relationship he had been grooming her for through their extensive text communications. When Zion resisted, prosecutors argued, Brazier killed her and disposed of her body to cover up his crime. Defense attorneys attempted to challenge the prosecution's narrative, arguing that Zion could have died of natural causes or that the marijuana she was smoking might have been laced with something that caused her death. They suggested that Brazier's panic and subsequent lies stemmed from fear rather than guilt, and that his internet searches could be explained as curiosity rather than criminal planning. However, the defense's arguments were significantly weakened when a forensic pathologist who examined Zion's medical records testified that there was nothing in her medical history that could have caused her to suddenly die in the manner Brazier described. This expert testimony effectively dismantled the defense's theory that Zion had died of natural causes, leaving the jury with little doubt about the intentional nature of her death. The defense chose not to call any witnesses and instead focused their closing arguments on claiming that the prosecution had not proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. However, the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution proved compelling to the jury. After deliberating for only 30 minutes, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on second-degree murder charges. The swift deliberation reflected the strength of the evidence and the jury's conviction that Brazier was responsible for Zion's death. The second-degree murder charge indicated that while the jury believed Brazier had killed Zion, they were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the murder was premeditated enough to warrant a first-degree conviction. In June 2024, Brazier was sentenced to 43 to 100 years in prison for the murder conviction, with additional time for tampering with evidence. The lengthy sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and the judge's consideration of the ongoing suffering caused by Brazier's refusal to reveal the location of Zion's remains. The sentencing phase brought raw emotion to the courtroom as Zion's family members delivered powerful victim impact statements describing the devastating impact of losing their daughter and the ongoing torment of not knowing where her remains were located. Despite the conviction, the most heartbreaking aspect remains unresolved. Zion's body has never been found, despite the extensive and costly search of Pine Tree Acres landfill that lasted from late spring through early autumn of 2022. The tragic case of Zion Foster and Jaylin Brazier offers profound lessons that extend far beyond their family's devastating loss. This story serves as a stark reminder that the most dangerous predators can hide behind the mask of family bonds, exploiting the trust we place in those we consider our closest relatives. Trust within families requires vigilance. Zion's relationship with Jaylin was built on years of familial closeness. She considered him her favorite cousin and greatest admirer. Their frequent hangouts, at least twice a month, created a pattern of trust that Jaylin ultimately exploited. The lesson isn't to become suspicious of every family member, but rather to recognize that genuine family relationships don't involve sexual grooming or inappropriate advances. The over 4,000 sexually explicit text messages between Zion and Jaylin represent a clear violation of normal cousin boundaries that should have raised immediate red flags. Warning signs often hide behind familiar faces. Jaylin's consumption of cousin porn and his persistent sexual advances towards Zion were warning signs that went undetected by the family. His internet searches about drugs that could kill someone and whether murder charges could be filed without a body reveal a calculating mind planning violence. Justice can prevail without closure. Jaylin's conviction for second-degree murder, despite Zion's body never being found, proves that justice systems can adapt to complex cases. The jury's 30-minute deliberation reflects how compelling evidence can overcome the absence of traditional proof. However, the family's ongoing pain, not knowing where Zion's remains are, reminds us that legal justice and emotional healing are separate processes. Zion Foster was more than the tragic headlines that now define her story. She was a 17-year-old girl with dreams, aspirations, and a future that was stolen from her by someone she trusted most. As the oldest of 6 children, Zion had responsibilities and relationships that extended far beyond her years. Her family remembers her not as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman whose life had meaning and purpose that transcended the horrific circumstances of her death. The betrayal Zion experienced cuts to the very core of what we believe about family bonds. Jaylin Brazier wasn't a stranger lurking in shadows. He was her favorite cousin, someone she texted excitedly about spending time with, someone she trusted enough to get into his car on that January evening. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those who know us best, who understand our vulnerabilities, and who exploit the trust we place in family relationships. Zion's mother, Sierra Milton, continues to live with the dual burden of grief and uncertainty. While Jaylin's conviction brought legal justice, the family's healing remains incomplete without knowing where Zion's remains are located. The extensive search efforts, including the costly landfill excavation, demonstrate how communities can unite in support of grieving families, even when the odds of success are minimal. The 43 to 100-year sentence ensures that Jaylin will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars, but it cannot restore what was taken from the Foster family. Zion's siblings will grow up without their big sister. Her parents will forever wonder what she might have accomplished, and her community will remember her as a cautionary tale about the predators who hide behind familiar faces. If you found this case impactful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content like this.